So once again, this hadith narrated by Aisha. And once again, not really narrating on the authority of the Prophet ﷺ, but more or less her authority under the understanding that she would have not have done this of her own volition, but it's something that either the Prophet ﷺ would have instructed her to do, or that she would have done under his supervision, one way or the other. And she says in the beginning, we used to, كانت إحدانا, really means one of us, the literal in the Arabic, which is saying that it was a thing that not just her, specific to her, but it was something that became a sunnah. In other words, something that was done during the time of the Prophet ﷺ amongst the women there. So tahid, to menstruate. Once again, this is the mother, Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, narrating something that normally we would say would be something not to be narrated in this sense, to use another term, or to not say in the presence of men and so forth, but nevertheless, because there's a ruling associated with it, obviously it's included. And I guess a little background is needed without getting into too much detail, but obviously women back then didn't have the modern sanitary products that women today have access to. And so whatever they wore underneath was pretty much similar to their clothing. And I recall some narrations that they would wear something like a sarwar, like loose pants underneath whatever overgarment that they had. So more than likely they had some type of, not disposable obviously, but something that they would wear underneath during the menstrual time. And I think I recall some narrations about to that effect. So whatever it was that they would be wearing, it would be something that they would keep wearing and not change, most likely not every day either. So if a menstrual cycle is 4, 5, 6, 7 days, whatever it might be, then more than likely they would be wearing that same thing throughout that time. How do we figure that out? Well, the fact that she says we used to scrape the blood off means that it had time to dry. So if it had time to dry, then we're talking about some days, a matter of days. And like we said in the previous hadith, blood being an excretion is considered to be najasa. So there's actually two separate things here. The idea of menstruation preventing, seen as a mana or preventive from praying and fasting and sexual intercourse, that's a ruling by itself, and hajj and tawaf and all that. And then the idea of the garment having najasa on it is something separate. So the taharat al-hadath, in other words, the ritual purity, is associated with the ruling of the person, whether they're going to pray or not pray. That's not really what's talked about here. What she's talking specifically about here is the garment, the clothing that was being worn. So once the menstrual blood has ceased to flow, then at this point the ruling is that the woman is to make ghusl, and then she can pray. So included in that, whatever garment she's wearing has to be also free from any blood. And this ruling is blood in general is considered to be najasa. So it's not specific to menstrual blood. So if someone were to bleed to an extent, what they say is bigger than الدرهم البغلي, which is, if any of you have seen a mule or a donkey, if you look towards the back of one of the legs, there's this circular patch. Y'all look at me like I'm crazy. I've seen it. So next time you see a donkey, make sure to look for that patch. So this circular patch is about probably the size of $50 or something like that. Or like, what's a $50? I don't even know what it's like. But the $50 used to be just about that size. So if the blood extends beyond that much, then it's considered to be too much, and one should have to clean it from their clothing, or have another pair of clothing to wear, and not pray with something that has that much blood on it. So a small amount of blood, someone who paper cut on their hand or something like that, that's considered not enough to necessitate to think about washing it or cleaning it, something like that. So it's not a specific thing to menstrual blood per se, but it came in the hadith talking about menstrual blood. So she would first scrape it off, as we said. So if you have a dried stain, again, this is not specific to blood, but any stain, if a stain that is dried, then the better way to do it is to scrape it off. So because if you wet it, as we said, then it will just spread more. So to be scraped off, like she did here, radiallahu anha, and then tandahu ala sa'ilihi, and then sprinkle over the rest of the garment. And you might say, well, why did she do that? Right? Because if she's seen the stain, she washes it, she scrapes it off, wash, okay, there might still be remnants of the stain, but as we said from the previous hadith, that's not a problem, that's okay. But why did she sprinkle on the rest? Imam Malik takes this to mean that when there's a possibility that some of the najasa could be on the rest of the garment, but you don't see it, right? You don't see the stain itself, so there's nothing to wash, but you have a suspicion that it might have come on the rest of the garment, then you, in nadah, which is the sprinkling of water, which means you're not touching the clothing with your hand and washing like this, that's called washing, but your hand is wet, and you do this. Right, that's called sprinkle, right? Yeah, sprinkle over the rest of the area where there may have been suspected najasa. So that's actually what we call hukm ta'abbudi. There's no particular reason that may actually, it's not going to clean anything, right, if there's a stain. But the idea behind it is, because there may be some element of doubt, then this is a means by which to alleviate that doubt and then sprinkle the rest of it. And again, that's not specific to menstrual blood or any blood, but any stain. So it's actually quite intricate when you read the fiqh about the idea of stains and doubts. I don't want to get too much into it now, but it can actually be done in a chart that has all of the possibilities. But one of the possibilities being that if you are unsure if your garment was stained with some najasa, but you know that there was najasa there, but you're not sure if it got on that part of the garment, then it would be sprinkled. This is different than there was no najasa to begin with, and there's no sign of najasa. So najasa never fell on you, never came on you, nor do you see a sign. Then you're not to do anything, because that would be delusion, right? And that would be, going into the whole OCD thing we talked about earlier, which some people unfortunately have this issue. Like the man who was walking with Umar radiallahu anhu, and then some water fell from the rooftops, and then the man looked at Umar and said, we think we should clean that off. فَعَلَهُ بِالطُّرْبَةِ, which is his walking cane, walking stick. He held it down in a threatening manner, it was like, what we would do today, slap him. He didn't slap him, but that was metaphorically, he wanted to slap him, what are you talking about? There's no reason to think that water falling from Muslim home is going to have anything of najasa in it. So why are you putting this type of delusional thinking into people's minds to begin with? That's different than a legitimate doubt, which is considered legitimate doubt. Something fell on me, najasa, and I'm not sure where it fell exactly, and I can't see the stain. In this case, sprinkle. I see the stain, I wash it off. The rest of it, where I have some doubt, I sprinkle it. So this is the issue that it's referring to here. Anyone have any questions about it? So we'll finish off with this hadith number 23. Once again, Imam Mujamra narrates, عن عائشة أن امرأة من الأنصار قالت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كيف أغتسل من المحيض؟ قال خذي فرصة ممسكة فتوضئي ثلاثا ثم إن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم استحيا فأعرض بوجهه أو قال توضئي بها فأخذتها فجذبتها فأخبرتها بما يريد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Aisha narrated that a woman from the Ansar, which would be people from the Ahl al-Medina, said to the Prophet ﷺ, how should I wash after menstruation? He said, take a perfumed cloth and make wudu with it. I wouldn't have translated it like that. Because here wudu is most likely in the linguistic sense, not in the ritual sense. So I would translate that as take a perfumed cloth and wash with it. Then the Prophet ﷺ became shy, kind of a clumsy translation there, but يعني استحيا, became shy, became shy. Let's leave it at that. I'll probably can't think of a better way to say it. So he turned his face away, so I took her and explained to her what the Prophet ﷺ meant. The Prophet ﷺ, in another hadith, he praises the women of the Ansar specifically, where he said, يعني نعم النساء نعم الأنصار اللاتي لم يمنعهن حياءهن من تفقههن أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. يعني, how great are the women of the Ansar that their modesty did not prevent them from learning their deen. And you find this is kind of a little, sort of a pattern, a theme amongst the Sahaba, that you had the very senior companions like Umar and Abu Bakr and Ali and so forth, who knew the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca and were less apt to ask questions directly of him. And then you had others who were newer, many of them from Yathrib or Medina, who kind of didn't, who were not shy to do so. So the Prophet ﷺ was praising them in that regard. The other one, the famous one, the hadith of Dhul Yadaini, where the Prophet ﷺ prayed a prayer and then it seemed like he didn't pray the 4 rak'ahs, he prayed 3 instead. So Dhul Yadaini, and literally his nickname was the man of the 2 arms, because he said his arms were long. So he said, أَقَصَرْتُ صَلَاةَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ أَمْ نَسِيتَ? Has the prayer been shortened or did you forget? The Prophet ﷺ said, كُلُّ ذَلِكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ. He said, none of that happened. And then he thought about it for a minute and he realized that he may have left a rak'ah, and so he went back to it. But in that gathering were some of the senior Sahaba. Umar, Abu Bakr, Masalan, Uthman, Ali. They didn't ask. But Dhul Yadan, and then it became like a thing, like it's always good to have someone like a Dhul Yadain with you. Because they're the people who will ask questions when others may be, shy to do so. This is a scenario also found in the circles of knowledge, for example, Imam Malik. There would be people who would come from far away, and they would ask the questions that his close confidants want to ask, but they were like, I don't know if we're going to ask him that. And they're happy that someone else from the outside is asking those questions. So here, one of the women of the Ansar, she was very direct. So she is asking about washing after menstruation and not wudu. Can't be wudu, because wudu is the same from whether it's after menstruation or ghusl, whether it's from after sexual relations or after ceasing of menstrual blood, same thing. There's no difference in the way you go about doing it. So she's asking something that's more along the lines of specifically with her with her private area and what to do and how to wash that. So something quite direct, right, that you think, that's like, even the commercials on TV, they don't say it like that. They kind of, have the flowers and, you don't know what the commercial's about, but somehow you figure out the last thing it says, Anyway, forget what I just said. So he told her, khudi firsa, and the firsa is a perfumed cloth. So here, perfumed cloth, we're not talking about what's needed to be done to wash the menstrual blood. Because once it stops flowing, then the woman is to do ghusl like she does any other time. And there's no stipulation for a perfumed cloth. So this is kind of something extra. So she was asking something a bit more specific. The idea that there might be some type of smell that she wanted to deal with, and so she's asking about that. How do I wash that? What should I do? So he was very specific and direct as well. So take this perfume cloth. فَتَوَضَّئِ ثَلَاثًا. Here, tawadda'i is not the wudu of the prayer. And the one who translated it thought that. How do you make wudu with a cloth that's perfumed like this? No. That's not what it's talking about at all. So, however, it's clear that she may have not understood either. right? Because he told her, فَتَوَضَّئِ ثَلَاثًا ثُمَّ إِنَّ النَّبِيَّ صلى الله عليه وسلم استحيا. There's something that happened here that's not included. Namely, she probably said like, what do you mean? I don't understand that. What do you mean make wudu with it? And, use this cloth and apply it directly to the area. That's what he's saying. But that's what he wanted her to understand. So he didn't want to, istahya at this point he made the ruling clear in this regard, but however, for him to be any more explicit would have been kind of outside of the area of etiquette at this point. But who was standing there at the same time? Sayyidah Aisha. So she said, فَأَخَذْتُهَا فَجَذَبْتُهَا. So I took her and I pulled her next to me. فَأَخْبَرْتُهَا بِمَا يُرِيدُ. Then I showed her what he's talking about. To me, this hadith, especially that last part, is, I would use that as the biggest kind of proof, daleel, whatever you want to call it, that there must be a competent group of women teaching other women. No question about it. It's unequivocal right here, completely clear. Right? There are certain things that only another woman can explain to another woman. And that a man, no matter how much they know, I studied the book of menstruation, all that, but it remains a theoretical thing for me. I don't have an image of it. I can't picture it. I don't know. So there has to be women who can do that. And because Aisha radiallahu anha was in this picture, she was in this scenario, she was able to do that. And number two, the Prophet ﷺ allowed it, right? And she didn't ask his permission. She knew what he was talking about. She understood. So she did take the initiative, right? So that means women don't have to wait permission from men to do that. Right? You don't need permission from men to do that. So her being a qualified faqih herself, and in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, even though he is the master teacher, so to speak, but nevertheless, she didn't feel that she couldn't show this woman from the Ansar exactly what the Prophet ﷺ was talking about, and showed her directly what was intended. So having women scholars is vital. It's a lost sunnah, sort of. It's not that many anymore. There's nothing wrong if they're teaching both sexes. Aisha obviously narrates this hadith, and there are men who narrated this from her. How do you think that transaction transpired? They heard her voice and she narrated to them. So she did have groups of men coming and learning from her. And you'll find in many of the annals of many of the ulama how they had these scholarly relationships with women who were their teachers, who were their shaykhat. So I think that's a very poignant hadith for that. Also, I think to point out that here, the ruling here is not an obligatory one. No one said that it was. So it's merely in the realm of recommended. And there is some discussion about, for this person, why a perfumed thing? Who is that for? Is that possibly for a husband, if there's a husband involved? Or if she didn't have a husband, then could it be merely for herself? So there's both opinions, both ways about that. But the idea is that part of the etiquette of the Muslim is to like cleanliness, an-nadafatu min al-iman, even to have smells that are offensive to remove them. This is a theme in the Sunnah. For example, not coming to the masjid smelling of onions and garlic. It's not specific to onions and garlic, it's any smell. So it could be, smoking of cigarettes, it could be sweat, it could be any of those things. Any type of smell that you bring into the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that could be offensive to others, it's either makruh or haram to do so. And to be honest, it's not specific to the house of Allah either. Anywhere you go where you're going to interact with people. Right? And that includes interacting with the spouse, even the people of your household. So there was this level of etiquette between spouses that, how was to say it, but the kind of attitude of, I'm home, I can just let it all hang out, my wife doesn't care. If I just came in sweaty from the gym and I sit there on the kitchen table for a while, just, sweating, and That's all right. She doesn't mind giving me a hug anyway, and that type of thing. That's not really, we can't say that's from the etiquette of the Sahaba or of the Prophet ﷺ. So, tazayyun, like Imam Shadi said in the beginning, خُذُوا زِينَتُكُمْ عَنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ. So zina, the idea of zina, of beauty, and beautifying things, right, that's important. It's a concept we have. And beautification of things can be in things that you look at, things that you hear, and things that you smell. And so it's quite important that even, especially the people of your household, that people try to do that. So the idea of this, doesn't matter how you appear in front of your spouse, I can't find a good reference for that in the Sunnah. In fact, I found the opposite. The Prophet ﷺ, for example, he told men, when you're traveling and you're coming back, don't knock on your families in the middle of the night. Don't surprise them. Some might say, well, you might find somebody there. No, that's not what he's talking about. Don't surprise them in that she's not prepared to receive you. And so you may see something that you may dislike. She may not be prepared, maybe look a little unkempt, that type of thing. And keeping the marital relationship intact is important, right? Interestingly enough, I haven't seen the hadith with the opposite reference, even though it's kind of understood, namely that, the woman shouldn't go see the man when he's not in a position to receive her. But I think that goes back to the idea, the difference between males and females is that men are much more visually oriented. And so they will associate things more visually. So how the woman appears in terms of her attractiveness, how she looks, what she's wearing, that type of thing, has probably more of a greater effect than vice versa. I'm not saying that women don't like to see men, all sweaty and that type of thing, but for men it's kind of, I'm going to tell them the secret. It's like a big deal to see. It can change the mood completely, from like happy to be home to be like, oh, see, he's laughing. But it's true. So remember that the Sharia is addressing things the way they are, not the way they think, the way we think they are. So human nature is human nature. And, the male, whatever, ego, male, whatever, is what it is. And so it's going to be, the Sharia is addressing that. So I don't see it as kind of a knock against women or anything. It's quite the opposite. Right, because it's giving them idea. It's perfectly okay and permissible to try to maintain that marital relationship in the best way possible. And if that means that, there's a little extended effort in how they prepare one another for the other spouse. Like Ibn Abbas said, I like to أتزين لزوجتي كما أحب أن تتزين لي. I like to be nice and smell nice and look nice for her. Like I like for her to do the same for me. So again, it's that relationship of the other, of how you view the other, of, in effect, serving them to some extent, right? Because you are serving what would make them happy, or would not be offensive to them. It's really a service to others. Again, it's important that we remove ourselves this whole idea of service and seeing as it being a sign of inferiority, or in our tradition, it doesn't have that connotation with it. So the husband serves the wife serves the husband, this mutual idea of mutual service. And that idea of mutual service goes back to the idea of more emphasis on fulfillment of obligations to others than to seek the fulfillment of one's own rights. Because the fulfillment of your right is really the fulfillment of the other's obligation, which technically you don't have a lot of control over. But what you do have control over is the fulfillment of their obligation. So we're always told to secure others' rights by fulfilling their obligations. You don't find too much urging of seeking your rights. In fact, in the Quran it's quite the opposite. In the Quran we are encouraged to relinquish rights, to let mistakes pass, to let things slide. وَأَن تَعْفُوا أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. Right? So to let things pardon people is closer to taqwa than to have this stubborn insistence upon, fulfillment of rights. Wallahu a'lam. So I think we'll stop there. Yes,
Can you just clarify, because I read this without really understanding it, I would assume that ghusl is not required. Ghusl is required. This is part of ghusl, right?
No, this is not part of ghusl. This is like after ghusl.
Okay. And secondly, I was under the impression women should not wear perfume. So is this like just because she's solving a particular problem?
Well, it's perfume that's kind of, that would not be, it's not something that can be smelled outside.
Okay.
Yeah. That's true. Perfume outside, no, but the assumption is this type of perfumed cloth is not going to be something that can be smelled outside of the area itself. So. Anyone else? Guys? You're not touching that one. طيب جزاكم الله خير والله continue next week بإذن الله أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله ونسأل المسلمين واستغفر الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وما أرنا الحق حق رزقنا اتباعه ومن الباطل ورزقنا اجتنابه ونجنا من النار من خزي ومن كل من قرب إلى النار وادخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار رب اغفر ورحمة وتجاوز عما تعلم إنك أنت العزيز الأكرم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد ورحمة العالمين أجمعين الفاتحة. Hisham said we just...
Is it more than
I use that.
Did you just send that? Last weekend? No. No, I did not. I didn't see it. Oh my God.
Who has copied it?
Okay, okay. Memorization. There's also the other. That too? Yes, that's part of it.
No, but Hisham is one who chose it. So
Okay.
So there's another Shana from
Yeah, yeah.
to translate.
Yeah, yeah, that's going.
But yeah, so we don't want to. We just translate this one out, just let them know that.
Yeah.
I know it's a,
Yeah.
I agree with you, but I think there might be some personal more harm than that.
Are these all this one?
Oh, yes.
I know, I have more cards.
It's like photography as well.
Yeah.
Hold on, what he does. I can't translate it.
I can't translate it better than. So it's just like the one.
I can do all, like, I think that's what I'm doing. Yeah. Like, I was gonna say, I'll email you.
لا هذا إذا كان متفرق إذا قدرنا الجمع بين المتفرق كان قدره أكبر من هذا عادي ميزان والله وقاعد في البيت ليش؟
أنا
Yeah, some of the